Good morning, and thank you for joining us for our panel webinar event, the 411 on Microsoft Teams Phone, brought to you by Apex Digital Solutions. Please note this session is being recorded. If you do not wish to be a part of the recorded session, you may drop now and watch the recording at a later date. There is a Q&A panel. If you have any issues or questions, please do submit those, and we'll do our best to address them before the end of our session, or we'll follow up after. All right, let's get started. My name is Jamie Waterfield. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer for Apex Digital Solutions, and I will be your host for today's discussion. I'm thrilled to introduce our panel, each who brings significant experience with Microsoft Teams and Unified Communications. First, we have Sean Flahy. He's the Senior Practice Director for Microsoft at Apex Digital Solutions. Next, we have Adam Ball, co-founder of Cloud Revolution and 5-time Microsoft MVP. Welcome, Adam. We've also got Eric Truex, Center of Excellence Architect for Microsoft, who's focused on Teams meetings and calling. Thanks for joining us. And we have Joe Mock, UCaaS and CCaaS Pre-Sales Engineer for C3 Technology Advisors. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so let's get started. I'm going to stop sharing. So before we dive in, I want to just kind of set the stage a little bit about, what the driving factors are for today's discussion. Remote work has been the norm for most of us over the past year and a half, and in this environment, maintaining personal connections it's a bit challenging. If you're like me, you find yourself kind of missing those water cooler talks and little personal connections, opportunity to stop by someone's desk. So it should be no surprise to anyone that Teams Phone has seen unprecedented growth, reaching over 1 billion monthly calls. So we're all looking for that voice connection, which is important for emotion and understanding each other. The future of work has arrived quickly. More quickly than expected, we could say it's here. There is no future. Now is the time to modernize communications. So Eric, you and I were talking the other day. We discussed adopting a new voice solution like Teams is a lot easier than the days of the past. You have to worry about lifts and shifts over a weekend in the past and just take everyone at the same time. But that's not the case anymore, is it?
No, it's not. It's not at all. And it's a dramatic shift that's catching a lot of people off guard. But I personally feel it's a really cool shift as well, right? So I'm an old phone person back in the day, right? I used to schedule the weekend cutovers that, we were shifting everybody at once. And it used to be when you would go into a potential customer, you were looking at making a dramatic shift to their entire organization. You would win, except for the very large organizations, but you would generally win an entire customer, all of their facility, or at least all of a specific site. And so our sales cycles and our efforts were geared towards that type of mechanism, towards that technical migration as well, knowing that, hey, once I win this business, I get everything. Sometimes you would split off the call center, stuff like that, or specific, maybe sites and regions, stuff like that. That's not the case anymore. We see, and this is a good thing, we see that we can coexist with legacy PBXs, with modern communication methods like Teams, with existing IP PBXs, the Cisco's, Avayas, and Mitels and all those. We have this coexisting world where we're all talking, the promise of SIP is finally becoming a reality. Everybody remember when SIP was like, oh yeah, SIP, can talk to SIP, and everybody's SIP, but then everybody made their own SIP and nobody SIP talked to each other? Yeah, I remember. So now that we've actually gotten to a point where SIP is talking to each other reliably, we can call transfer, call forward, call conference, right? Those are the three big features we needed to say, me and you, different systems, we can interop, we can talk to each other. Now that we can do that, the 5 of us could be sitting in an office cube area or at home, and I could be on one solution, you could be on another, and you could be on another, and we're all able to talk and communicate to each other, transferring calls, sending calls, receiving calls, almost seamlessly. Do we get 585 features that are exactly the same? No. And I would argue we shouldn't, because 575 of those were worthless. But we do have this area where we're now looking at grabbing up, solving business problems rather than just assuming a customer, rather than just collecting a customer into our own little envelope. Now we're actually solving problems to go, oh, hey, your HR organization wants to do this. I think I have a good solution. I think I know how I can do that. And we're implementing ways to coexist, and our migration patterns fit that. So
that's great.
I think I talked for a long time. Sorry.
No, that's perfect. And, I mean, exactly. I talked to a customer the other day, and they had a small team of people with a very specific need, and they were concerned about the timeline. How can I take this project on? I need them up, next month, but our organization is too big. And that's exactly the conversation we have. You can address that team's needs, worry about the rest later. We'll integrate it. And certainly one of those ways to enable that is how you connect to the PSTN, right? And what direct routing enables. So let's talk a little bit about okay, we're going to go to Teams. How am I connecting to the PSTN? I've got these calling plans from Microsoft. I have direct routing options, but it's also a few different direct routing options today. And then Microsoft recently announced Operator Connect for GA later this year. We're going to come back to Operator Connect, but Adam, you have dealt with customers as large as 10,000+ seats migrated from legacy PBXs to Teams phones. You've dealt with a lot of direct routing conversations and implementations. What are the things that you find customers need to think through, or what are the driving points in that?
Yeah, and I think it goes back to what Eric was just talking about in some of these aspects of how do you want to get from point A to point Z. I don't even want to call it point A to point B anymore because it's just too much of a journey. And so as customers, if you're an organization that's thinking about how do I make that shift over to Teams, you've got, like Jamie, like you were just saying, you have different options, whether it's I've got calling plans up in the cloud from Microsoft. Maybe I want to go all in. There's lots of reasons why customers might want to go all in with Microsoft, where it's like, hey, I get the simplicity of a single bill. I get everything in one spot. We talk frequently around how and I think it gets made fun of, but it's the do less with more or do more with less kind of thing, where slogan that Microsoft had, where it was this mindset of we've got one person. I tell you, I meet so many companies where it's like, I've got one person who's now responsible for all of this stuff. So calling plans can make sense in that, all the way to I've got existing circuits that I can't move off of. So maybe I'm looking at direct routing where I'm putting the SBCs, or you're kind of looking at a hybrid, or even an alternative to that, which is we're seeing a lot of direct routing as a service where customers are going to their carrier and the carrier is putting the SBC in their cloud, which now customers who might have been small or might have had a spot where it was, hey, I only had a single connection at that location, now are able to get business continuity and business survivability in ways that they were never able to do that before. I've seen several customers recently who are in that boat. But ultimately, what's nice about it is that they can go back to, I've got location A, I need to move that quickly, then come back to the rest of the locations, and you can find a methodology that works to get you there that also doesn't paint you into a corner as well. So I think that's the nice part about that ties all that back into, are we meeting business needs as we move forward?
So Jamie, one thing, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and I think one of the big things that when you take into consideration looking to move to a new platform is user adoption. Yeah. So everybody's using Teams, as you mentioned earlier. So being able to just enable that voice portion of it is a seamless transition. So we're used to using it. We see it for presence. We're using it for OneDrive integration, SharePoint integration. Now we just enable voice, and that user adoption is next to nothing. So I think that's a really great point that we focus on when we're talking to our customers, as well as, Adam, you brought up maybe a circuit that you still have under contract. Maybe you still have a PBX that's under contract.
Yep.
You know, you look at the Cisco platform, and either you're putting in expressways or people have to VPN in. Well, now you've got this capability where it's like, hey, I've got these 400 people that I need to support at home. They're familiar with Teams. Let's just enable Teams.
Yep.
And as Joe has said, one of the coolest parts about that is it gets kind of complex when we talk about these interoperabilities with SBCs and all these features that are going back and forth to create this one solution. But the user adoption part is great because they just see a little calling icon pop on their Teams client. That's it. We do all the magic in the backwards with wires and everything going crazy, but the client just sees a little icon pop up, and now they can make and send calls. That's one of the beautiful things about it, for sure.
Yeah.
So one thing I consistently discussed with each of you as we were kind of getting to know each other and expertise and history in this field is kind of those pitfalls. And, you know, especially with all of the different providers out there. Sean, you talk about a lot about, you know, everyone says they do Teams direct routing, right? What are some of the things that, some of the gotchas, some of the things we can caution customers to, what questions should they be asking when they're trying to figure out, you know, who they should work with, who they should get their service from? What are some of those questions that you guys caution around?
Yeah, I'll start with that one. Starting with Microsoft calling plans, we mentioned some of the benefits of that. It's a single vendor, a single cost, very straightforward. But then we have, you know, I think a running joke I hear a lot of is, you know, every vendor on the street is now a direct routing provider, right? And the question I always ask is, well, how do you configure your direct routing? Is it supported, and is it using certified session border controllers or SBCs? That is one of the most important questions I always ask these vendors is, you know, are you familiar with their direct routing documentation? What specific SBC are you using? Does it meet the you know, the certifications that Microsoft puts out there? Because some of them don't, and some of them talk about using other solutions, and they may have their own solution that tries to hook into you know, these session border controllers, and sometimes it works, but the question is it supported? And if I've got issues, who do I call? And that always comes up in a lot of these conversations.
Yeah, and that's something that we're very earnestly we're trying to create an environment that enabled as many partners as possible and as many providers as possible. And honestly, I think it's a good mentality. The flip side is it opens the door for less than ideal situations. And that's the nicest way I can put that. But we know we've created an environment where it's kind of like buying tickets to an event on the sidewalk. Are they real? I don't know. So one of the things we do, and I talk to not only partners but customers about this, is go by reputation. If you've never heard of this provider before and they're talking about millions of calls made a month, why haven't you heard of them? Why don't you know? You know, get to know that provider, you know, and get to know that solution. And if you know, you're trusting a very important business process to somebody that you AKA met on the street, I would look deeper in that relationship before going forward, for sure.
So there's the relationship evaluation, but I think there's also the feature, like, why are you looking at direct routing? That's your driving factor, but what are the trade-offs? So I know, Joe, you were really passionate about kind of running into situations with like E911.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's a huge one for me, right? Because, you know, if you go Microsoft Direct, they've got a great E911 application, right? What they're bringing in is really top of the line. But when you go to a direct routing partner, you have to use what they bring to the table. And so that nomadic 911 that C3 talks about with all of our customers, and how you can ensure that somebody on a laptop that moved from their desk to a conference room to their home at night, if they have to call the PSAP, are they providing the correct address? And that does vary from direct routing partner to direct routing partner. Some can do it natively, some bring in a third party, some can't do it, period. So it's down to a DID versus a device. And I think that's a key takeaway is you don't want it by DID. you want it by device, because all of us have a cell phone, we have an iPad, we have a laptop, we have a desk phone, and every one of those could have a different location. So you're absolutely right. That's one of the biggest ones we look at. Sean, to your point, we look at, are you using an IPsec tunnel back to Azure? Do you have SBCs in Azure? How are you maintaining? Is it a third-party app that so many people do use to bring in direct routing? And I do want to point out, this is something that I think is really important. There are so many other vendors out there that have their own offering that are cannibalizing their sales to be part of Microsoft Teams direct routing. What does that say?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Joe, I just want to echo your statement on the E911 piece. We talk to so many customers as well. I would encourage a customer who's looking at any new solution, I don't care what it is, to understand, especially here in the US, what are the new rules and regulations that have come in, whether that's Kerry's Law, Ray Baum's Act, etc. I can't reemphasize, Joe, what you just said enough around that, because it's ultimately people's safety. This is bigger than just a phone system. This is how do you protect your people. So
Yeah, and honestly, I mean, when you look at the state laws and Ray Baum's and Kerry's are, I think, pretty straightforward in what you need to do. Yeah. But when you look at the state laws, it's very difficult. They leave it very vague on purpose. So now we just kind of tell our customers, go to the max that you're comfortable going to. So now you can go back and say, we did what we felt was right, and we had a policy in place. So I think that's a very important piece to keep in mind.
I've been telling a lot of customers to make sure that they're including that E911 solution, and whatever flavor it takes, make sure that's included in the pilot. Because I've seen too many times where we in all good intention, we set up a pilot, we set up proof of concept, and we're out there and we're, oh, look, we've got 20 people and it's really cool. And then it gets really sticky and 20 turns into 30, into 40, into 100. Next thing you know, we're a production solution and we haven't actually done what is a legally critical component of our solution. And it sneaks up on us. So that's been one of the components that I've been very adamant. And when talking to anybody, like, no, this is, if you are even talking about leaving your network, this has to be a solution. And of course you're talking about leaving your network, because why else would you be doing this? So have to do it.
Yeah, Eric, you just said, oh, sorry, go ahead, Sean.
Oh, sorry. One thing I wanted to add, we're talking about the reasons why to do 911 and how teams can support that. One thing that I always talk about from the implementation side is, okay, now we've implemented our E911 solution. Let's test it, right? Got to validate and verify that this is actually doing what we want it to do and as designed, right? One thing that I love about Teams, it's calling plans. If you're doing 911, is you can do a calling plan or a 911 test, at least here in the U.S. by dialing 933. A lot of customers that I talk to don't know about that test, and what it does is it calls an emergency services bot, and when it does that, it will trigger. It'll say, "This is the address I show you're coming from. This is where you're going to be. This is where you're going to land. Are you going to land on the emergency contact center, or are you going to land directly to your local public safety answering point?" And you can do that all while not actually dialing an emergency services dispatcher, right? And so I know Microsoft offers that direct, but direct routing providers that can be configured on direct routing as well. And a lot of services I've seen do that. So would recommend in the implementation piece, once that's done, to try that out.
I'm sure they did that, because I have called emergency numbers so many times in my career. Hi, this is Eric from so-and-so customer. Can you validate the address? Thank you.
I think we've all done that.
Yep.
So, hey guys, I'm back. Sorry about that. I went into the office today to avoid the work from home issues, and the office building lost power. So that was super, super fun. I said this morning, oh, I just have a bad feeling about this. So storms in Michigan. Well, hey, I want to circle back. Thanks for carrying on the conversation. But, Sean, you mentioned certified devices for SBCs. And I want to kind of parlay into certified just devices in general. We jokingly have this conversation a lot about, I like to use my AirPods sometimes, and Sean gets a little frustrated with me because it hurts the experience. And if you invest all this time and money into rolling out a solution like Teams, and the experience is made poor for an end user because the right decisions weren't made around the devices, obviously that's something that a lot of companies don't think about early enough in the design and planning process, but it really is an important thing. So Sean, I'm going to let you kind of share your philosophy on why certified devices matter. What does it even mean to be certified, and how can customers validate, right, that they have the right devices?
Absolutely. And before I get into the whole certification program, I just want to talk about, just the device conversation in general when moving to Microsoft Teams as a phone system. Typically when we would go to a new phone system, it's okay, let's put a handset on everyone's desk, and we pick 1 or 2 models and we roll those out to everyone in the organization, and there's my new phone system, right? But when we go to a cloud-based phone system like Microsoft Teams, now we introduce a whole new, multiple categories of devices that users are actually going to use. And whether that's, you can still use your handset. There's Microsoft Teams handsets that you can still use if you need to. But what I'm seeing is when you migrate to Teams, the handset really isn't a factor anymore. And now we're talking about personal headsets, whether it's wired, USB, or wired with a USB cable or Bluetooth, whether we're talking webcams that we need to talk about, and various other categories of devices that are out there for Microsoft Teams. And so that introduces all of that. And so what Microsoft has done is there's actually a certification program. Microsoft specifically doesn't certify these. They are certified by a third party to work specifically for Microsoft Teams. And what that means is these devices will offer the best audio and video experience for Teams, whether you're calling or in meetings. A couple other things that are offered in certifications are plug and play. As soon as you plug in your certified Bluetooth or USB headset, Teams will automatically recognize that that's the device you want to use. So you're not switching audio devices and saying, hold on, let me switch devices, or it came through my computer audio. That's important. The other is call control from your device. So if I have a little control here where I can hit the mute button and I can volume up, volume down, and that actually controls my Teams client when I do that. So I can make sure that's a great experience too. And then back to your point, Jamie, about the AirPods. A lot of these devices have features such as outside noise canceling and things like that, where specifically devices like you just mentioned, they don't offer it. So I'm going to hear background wind noise or door slamming or any other background noise that you could potentially think about, for non-certified devices.
I do want to hit on that, Jamie, just because I do think there's there is an issue when you do a migration to a new phone system. You're looking at anywhere upwards of $500,000, depending on the size of the company, when they have to go buy new devices. And I do think that's where a direct routing partner could come in and say, listen, for that pull in a warehouse, for the lobby, we can use non-certified phone system, Teams phones, because they're non-vital. So to Sean's point, do we need noise cancellation in a vestibule? Probably not. Can we reuse some of those Polycom phones or audio code phones that you have? We can. And so that is maybe one of the benefits of a direct routing partner that says, we can supplement supplement the current phones that you have today, maybe not Cisco phones, but some other phones that you have in play today, and reduce that CapEx cost that you might incur.
Yeah, and that's a huge component that not just goes into SIP phones, but also analog devices, which are still proliferant throughout organizations and are a huge deal that we need to. They still play a role in business process, right? Whether it be because of a logistical issue, whether it be because of a physical architecture issue, right? So I knew of a customer that they could only have analog devices because they couldn't have any power over 24-volt tip rating. Because of gas and stuff in the air. They're like, no, we need a phone in this plant, but even the power over Ethernet will make things go boomy, which less booming is better. And so those SBCs and those direct routing solutions really provide just a huge array of abilities outside of that, right? For elevator phones, those plant phones, paging. It's still a thing. People do it.
Oh, manufacturing, absolutely. We see it a lot. And I was going to say, back at the pitfalls, analog is usually one of the big ones, whether it's handsets, et cetera. So Joe, your point on how do we reuse it? How do we take those devices? Where do we be strategic in it is one of those early conversations that you should have as far as that goes.
I see conference rooms missed a lot too.
Yep.
And again, if you're bringing voice to Teams, you've got bat phones in the conference room. Well, now you're probably going to parlay that discussion into, should we maximize this and pull video into it? Why just continue with the audio versus upping the experience overall, especially again in this hybrid world of work? So.
Yeah, and one of the cool things about, if you think about it, so most of the direct routing solutions are much more cost effective than replacing the entire meeting room ecosystem of a company. Those solutions are critical, they're not cheap. So for the cost of a direct routing solution, you can transition from your, the old star phones, I won't mention the name, but the old star phones, right, the analogs, you can keep those in place while progressively moving along. And with dial plan and SBCs, you can now have that as a 4-digit dial or 11-digit dial or whatever dialing pattern required to keep that number associated with that, and that number can then use the resources of Teams, right? Because it can come back through, and we get to play together nicely now, and allow for that migration pattern, not just in user migration, but now in devices and external connections migration as well. Very, very cool.
On that point, well, to kind of counter that point, Eric, I guess, totally agree. It allows you to transition at your own pace. That being said, we're in a hybrid work world where maybe half the people are at home, half the people are in an office, in a room. And how do we make that room experience the best? So what we're seeing a lot of are what are called Microsoft Teams rooms. And those are talking about certified devices. Again, we have various vendors out there that provide these Microsoft Teams rooms. But what it does is it brings a video camera, speakers, microphones into a room system, and really allows, and also a touch panel. So when you schedule your meeting with that conference room, you walk into that conference room, you see on the touch panel, you see, there's Sean's meeting. I click join, and all of a sudden that room is now a member of the Teams meeting, as if you and I were joining from home to our Teams meeting. So we see that a lot to provide a more consistent experience, no matter where you are, whether you're in the office or at home too.
Yeah, that was one of our. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
that was one of our big pushes, and I think it's a great thing. It's a very difficult technology challenge, is to enable every person in a meeting to have the same level of interaction ability. And you think, well, that's the people at home are at disadvantage. It's not true. The people in the room, because we are here in this great remote thing, and we can all see each other. We are equally involved in this. But if I was in a room with 6 other people, unless that is a certified device that is tracking faces and moving to each person individually, you may not see the person at the end of the table well. You may not notice that the person across from me spoke because the camera's still focused on me. So that camera tracking, people kind of joke about it. We always like, oh, look, it's on me now. It's important because it levels the playing field. We're working on a couple of really cool features as far as like raising hand and things like that, and making sure there's enough room in the space in the room. But that leveling that playing field is a very important aspect of the meeting experience and the hybrid work experience. We've released a bunch of information in Inspire. I'm just going to plug it real quick. And I hope you check it. I hope everybody checks it out. I know it's about Teams Phone, but the meetings are team phones and meetings align really quickly. More and more is coming out about that because it is such a big subject.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I was just to say that, if nothing more, when you're planning a voice rollout or a change in your system, you have to think about the conference rooms. It may be phased. And if cost up front is an issue, pretty much every provider these days, I know we offer it to customers, device as a service, you can spread that cost out.
Mm-hmm.
So we've been talking about some different options or drivers for direct routing, some really good kind of cautions of pitfalls and all of that. We mentioned Operator Connect earlier, and this is something that it's in public preview, limited set of partners, GA expected sometime maybe this quarter. And it's described, Eric, as simplicity to calling plans, flexibility of direct routing, brought to you by the operator of your choice. So what does that mean? When does this really fit in?
So let's start by defining some terms, right? So we call them operators. I didn't choose that term. I disagree with it, but that's all right. I'm not high enough up to change it. So what we would have called service providers or telcos. So think of that role, the person providing the PSTN service, things like that. That's the operator that we're talking about. And you say, okay, so Operator Connect. So define operator, what do you mean by connecting? So we've taken this program and we've allowed those operators to go very deep technically into the Microsoft Cloud for Teams. And that is, so people try to describe it as direct routing, and while technically kind of true, it would be direct routing on a level of steroids that we haven't seen, like Schwarzenegger in the 70s, like crazy. I don't think I can say that. And so, I mean, just an insane amount of integration. So it's part of a program where we allow these operators to integrate. Numbers are visible inside the Teams admin center. That's a big deal. Bringing in conference numbers, allowing your personal DID numbers in your facility to now be brought into the Teams admin center where you can select those. That's not something currently we can do in a direct routing solution, right? The SBC is aware of the numbers and has to control that. And we use dial plans and dial plan manipulation to kind of push and pull calls back and forth between Teams and the SBC. Now it's not. Now it's a full integration where the mechanism they'll use, which is most likely an SBC, is going to integrate with Teams admin center so that both are aware of a number. Well, that opens up a whole bailiwick of other issues that you can then employ all kinds of features across that connection. That Teams admin center, you're looking at policy, QoS. Let's just real quick talk about QoS across this, right? So we have this operator, and some of these operators are also local MPLS and Metro Ethernet operators. And I'm going to keep using the word operator because I've been told to. So they are. So if you have customer A sitting in, in Chicago, look at Chicago, sitting in Chicago, and they have a relationship with operator A, and then you have Teams in the cloud. If they have that MPLS Metro Ethernet connection, and operator has the connection in order to be an Operator Connect operator, you have to have that connection to Microsoft. They can pass from client to Teams all the way up in the cloud, QoS across the board, all the way. We haven't been able to do this in ExpressRoute. And ExpressRoute, we found out that was kind of a clunky mechanism for that. It was actually better for just a security channel. So, so yeah, a very cool mechanism for that deeper integration. We talked a little earlier about direct routing as a service, and that's still a thing that's still very cool. This goes to that level of bringing in those telco service providers, operators into that so that you can see exactly what's going on. The list is kind of small right now, I think 15 or so, 20, I think it is. Those were just the initial run. There has been so much interest. It also takes time. One thing to consider on this is bringing the operators on board because of the technical integration and the requirements of each one. It takes time to onboard them, and that is, I mean, I don't know the exact amount of time because we've only done the first run, and the first one's always more difficult. But it's a lot more interest has been developed internationally and in the U.S. and it's I think within December to January timeframe, I think it is, you're going to see a lot more operators added to the list when we go GA. So I'm pretty excited about it.
So what's the specific customer scenario? I mean, if I'm already deployed partly on direct routing or I have some calling plans, is there a place for Operator Connect, or is there, what's kind of, when should I consider it?
Well, one of the ways you would consider this is if you are it was specifically designed for outside of calling plan area. So you're in a geographical region outside of a calling plan, and you have a relationship with a provider, with an operator. So you have this really good deal set up with this operator. You want to use Teams for calling, but you're outside of calling plan, and your direct routing solutions are not as stable as you would care for. So you look at Operator Connect in order to have this highly integrated solution with a trusted operator. One of these days I'm used to saying that. With a trusted operator that you can now fully use as if it's taking the SBC direct routing mechanism and treating it as a calling plan. So you get the trust, you get the confidence in knowing it's there. You also get the control inside Teams Admin Center. I mean, can you imagine taking your existing DIDs with your provider, going into the Teams Admin Center and assigning it to users? And I'm not even talking PowerShell commands. This is inside of the GUI of Teams Admin Center. So you talk about let's talk about the transition of administrators. How many people have had to work with the administrators to bring them from an existing platform onto Teams? Which, if you're not doing that, by the way, you should, is that bringing those administrators along. So if they're used to Cisco's command line, if they're used to, Avaya's, Chasta, whatever you want to do, being able to bring them on and not have to force them into a new PowerShell language, but to give them a visual representation of how to move those numbers and how to do those things and manipulate calls and stuff like that, huge benefit. Also locally, so inside of the calling plan region, you're one of the biggest benefits is to using the existing numbers without having to port them, to keep control of those numbers. So let's say you're a large organization, let's say in the US, and you have 10 or 15 large locations. Calling plan can serve them all, but then you'd have to port all of those phone numbers over. And let's say you also had an integrated solution between your different sites. Operator Connect allows you to keep control of that phone number both locally and in the cloud, because you can change where that number goes. So you could change in your operator, say, no, I want this number to go over to St. Louis rather than Chicago, or I want to go up to Teams. Either one, either way. So very exciting application across the board. And honestly, I think we've just seen the tip of the iceberg on this. I think it's going to become a much bigger solutioning, so that we'll have the three pillars of, calling plans, direct routing, and then Operator Connect, which will be probably the biggest pillar. But I don't think I'm allowed to say that. Calling plans is the best, right?
So Eric, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
For one, the Operator Connect for conferencing, I think is what I'm most excited about, is being able to provide that calling in for conferencing. We always see that as a big hurdle when you either you're getting that voice license and then you maybe a calling plan, but now you need that $4 audio conferencing license. A lot of people aren't prepared for that. So I think with the Operator Connect for conferencing, that's going to be a big win as well. But my question for you is, with Operator Connect, are you now incurring usage charges that you wouldn't incur with a dial plan, or maybe going with a direct routing partner that has maybe a bundle of 1,500 minutes or 3,000 minutes?
Excellent question. And no, you're not. And that's also another big thing when you talk about consumption and things like that, is you're not. So it kind of like direct routing, whereas when you made a call on direct routing, you didn't consume your minutes. You're now consuming them on your Operator Connect contract. And this is where, and I always say this, nothing is free, right? If you think it's free, look again. You're paying for it somewhere. And this is one of those instances, right? So direct routing enabled us to take calls and route them over. So I didn't consume minutes off my calling plan. I consumed them off of the SBC, which was connected to something else. Same with Operator Connect. I'm not consuming them off my calling plan. I'm bringing them over and consuming them from my operator. Now, you may have, and that depends on the relationship with the operator, by the way. You could have a relationship where you don't get, you don't consume minutes for local calls, or you could have a special rate, or, all of these different unique relationships. We have some structure around that. But that was one of the benefits we wanted to bring into this, was it's essentially direct routing with special operator relationships, so that you can have that different level of spend as your organization, sees fit. A lot of, there's a lot that's going to happen in that space. But yeah, we don't force that for the, you don't consume minutes. That's a long way of saying that. Sorry.
So, we're talking about a lot of innovation here, right? This is new. This is different. I think in Inspire, they talked about, 300 new features being released to teams, right? It's a very fast pace. The other place we see a lot of new innovation is in the ISV community around teams, and that includes teams calling. So, text messaging is one. Joe, you and I have had a lot of customers looking for text messaging with teams, and we've explored different options out there. Certainly contact center, not necessarily innovative in and of itself. Contact center's been around, but the integrations with contact center. So, when there are these unique requirements of customers, or they're thinking, well, Teams natively doesn't support that. I mean, we know Microsoft, the history has been, they don't build to 100% of everything a customer needs, right? They build to 80% and leave that 20% for the ISV community to innovate around. They enable that innovation. Microsoft talked about Azure Communication Services. They enable it, they may certify it, but at the end of the day, you're going to bring in third-party solutions. So what are some of the cool things that you've seen out there? And when customers have a need like this and they're evaluating providers, what's kind of the advice that you have?
Yeah, I mean, I'll hit on contact center first. I think that's a big part of what we do here at C3 is to help our customers evaluate what's the best platform and how do they want to consume it. Do they want their agents within Teams, or do they just want to have the ability to see presence and chat and do certain things within the contact center platform? And so, for me, whether it's talking about SD-WAN and firewalls or contact center and voice systems, I like best of breed. And so if Microsoft Teams doesn't have a solution for contact center, now we can go out and say, here's the ones that really pair well, whether it's on the certified list already, or they're in a certification process with Microsoft Teams. There's probably 30 different contact center platforms out there. And then you've got some contact center platforms that were certified in Skype for Business, but they're coming in on Teams as well. So that's our consideration, is just making sure that we're hitting the mark, and that it's not so much that it integrates with Teams, but it works nicely with Teams, but it's hitting the mark within the contact center. You brought up SMS, eFax, it goes right along with it as well. Again, that's where a direct routing partner can help, whether it's analog, we talked about that earlier, SMS, eFax. Those are big things that are a cost associated with doing a business, running a business. So when we can bring in some efficiencies with a direct routing partner that can provide that eFax or that SMS, we typically see that as a big win.
Let me be clear, never send a fax to Teams. We don't know what to do with T.38. We hate it. If we don't outright reject the call, keep it in the SBC. That's where they know what to do with something like a fax, and send it that way.
Yeah. Yeah, those are the two big ones, Jamie, and the other one, is really global coverage. So Microsoft has really expanded their coverage for calling plans. We've obviously got SBAs that we can use. We've got Operator Connect coming out later this year, but then there's some really great vendors out there for direct routing that, Eric, to your point, people have never heard of, but they're great partners. They focus on Microsoft. That's all they do. And that's where C3 comes in. We say, listen, we've had success with this company that you've never heard of, and they're not even based in North America, but let us introduce you to them and give you a feel for what they're capable of doing. And lastly, I'll say one last thing is the PowerShell requirements. A lot of direct routing partners can automate that, or they can do that for you with co-management or fully managed solutions.
Well, and I think you kind of said it, where you guys add value, and Cloud Revolution or Apex and the Microsoft customer account teams. It's validate, right? There's a reason that there are certified partners and providers out there. It's we do this day in and day out. We talk to customers with all different kinds of unique requirements, and we match those up with the solution providers to make sure that even if you've not heard of them, they've at least been vetted, or we have proven examples where they've been successful. So,
yep.
Well, I just want
to Jamie, to your point earlier, where you talked about how Microsoft generally goes about 80%. I think it's a good design to do that, because we allow that space for innovation, and that's something that in the past Microsoft has tried to be only this solution, right? Which is kind of similar to how RFPs used to be written, right? We've all read the phone RFP where like, you've got to do all this stuff. And you're like, well, obviously somebody who loves Cisco wrote this. I shouldn't say the name, but somebody that loves a provider wrote this because it's written for that solution. And it was always the pretense under, oh, we want a one solution. You could never get it. It was a myth. One solution for a large customer, having one PBX for everything, it just doesn't happen. You have a different analog solution. You have a different call center solution. You have all these different solutions involved. So let's get past that idea and look at, okay, so now that we've got something that can do 80%, that other 20 can be so rich by opening a broad market, right? Like, look at all the freedom you have now. As long as we can play together at a minimum level of interoperability, oh, look, you can do all these cool things. And I mean, I personally think that's the best ecosystem we can create.
I'd like to say one thing off of the top of that is that what I'm seeing today, if you went back 5-10 years ago when you talked about that all in on a provider or something like this, we are seeing so much more flexibility, which brings about new opportunities for customers to be more productive and to be more aligned technologically. I'm seeing, Joe, I'm curious to see, and we may not have enough time to talk about this, but I'd be curious to see what you're seeing from people actually taking advantage of contact center and things like that. In the past, contact center was so prohibitively expensive when you were talking about some of these bigger platforms. Now, whether it's a third party or even I'm seeing a lot of companies go, hey, Teams is doing what I need from a call routing perspective. I just need additional reporting. I can buy that for cheap. Now I'm all of a sudden getting what I've wanted for years. I just couldn't afford it in the past. That's the big thing that I'm seeing recently, is just the affordability of the platform as a whole to get those additional features is much more there.
You're absolutely right. And that's what, whether we talk about Eric going 80% and leaving the 20% open for innovation, or like I mentioned earlier, picking best of breed, right? So now you have that capability that if you say, I need voice only,
yep,
you have that option to go pick that. You look back in the old days when you had an on-premise PBX and your contact center was on-premise, you didn't have a choice. Your contact center was tied to that on-premise PBX. Now, using a cloud service, you can say, you know what? I'm 3 years into it. I don't like this contact center. I love my phone system. So let's go out and find a different contact center. It gives you that flexibility. And I absolutely love that. And I know we're wrapping up here. So I want to say thank you, Jamie and Sean, for inviting me. This has been great. I feel very fortunate to be on such a great panel with Adam and Eric as well.
Great. Well, thank you, Joe. Gonna any final thoughts, Sean, from your side to kind of round out that conversation?
I'll say, when evaluating Teams as a phone system, you have a couple options. You have calling plans to go straight with Microsoft, and there's advantages and disadvantages to that. You have direct routing, and many flexibility, a lot of flexibility with direct routing to go there, and then coming up with Operator Connect too. So, know each of those solutions as you make your decision, and obviously all of us or other providers would be happy to assist, with you making those decisions and really learning about the systems.
Great. Well, thank you, Eric. Any final thoughts? Sure, close out.
Sure. Yeah, there's two things real quick. One is we've got, as we saw with COVID, pushed us to innovate at an accelerated level, and it's a good thing. It was a very good thing for us. So that's continuing. We're keeping that pace, which is fun. But it's moving fast. So stay tuned. We're lots of cool stuff coming up, and we'll continue to come up. The other thing is, anytime you're talking with a customer, right, and you're having these conversations, and they start bringing up specific features, and they're like, "Well, this Team's calling to shared line appearance or something like this," shut that down. Go back to the business need that's being solved for. Anytime you're trying to do a line for line with features, it's just not productive. But look at solving problems, because that's really what we want to do. And that's why most of us like the telephony industry. It's a weird way to use technology to directly impact users. And it's a cool thing. So always bring it back to solving problems for customers.
Great. Well, that's absolutely what we're here to do. Adam, Sean, Joe, Eric, thank you so much for your time. And I know that some people did submit some questions. Apologize, we ran out of time before getting to those. I know that the conversation addressed some of the ones that were submitted. We'll circle back with you if you did not get yours answered. And if there's anything else that comes up, please don't hesitate to reach out. Appreciate the time. And until next time, thank you so much.